Pay close attention. The news you're about to see is fulfilling Bible prophecy.
Welcome to another edition of YPN News, bringing you the news that relates to Bible prophecy and foretold by Yeshua Hawkins. Well, in the news today, we have Russia wanting to become a Mideast power broker. Now, they want to get involved with the peace plan there that's going on between the Israelis and the Palestinians. So we'll discuss that along with more details or more countries saying that the two-state solution is the only way to go to solve that that crisis there. Right. And we also have Syria and Venezuela finding some common ground as the leaders of those countries get together, meet, discuss both their countries and what they're going through. Well, these stories and many more, but first, Dyess Air Force Base may be getting a new resident. Well, Dyess Air Force Base plays a big role in Abilene, Texas today. Now, the base has created 2,000 jobs and generates $400 million in annual revenues for the city of Abilene. And now it has the potential to do even more if the Air Force's newest bomber makes Dyess its home base.
That's right. The B-21 Raider is the next generation of bombers in production, and Abilene is making its case for why they should be the first to house the Raider. Its predecessor, the B-1B Lancer, is soon to retire, and the City of Abilene wants to ensure Dyess Air Force Base continues to be a thriving part of its community long after the Lancer is done doing its job.
Gary Bridewell, Vice President of Military Affairs Committee at the Abilene Chamber of Commerce, told KTAB News to not have flying missions at Dyess Air Force Base would be a bad thing. Well, speaking about the B-21 Raider, Bridewell said, with our weather, our training ranges, and Dyess runway, the infrastructure, it's a very important piece for a training mission at Dyess.
Greg Blair, chairman of the Military Affairs Committee, pointed out Abilene sets the bar high, winning awards like the Abilene Trophy and, most recently, the Barksdale. He commented, "We have a reputation that's unparalleled, that's unmatched in the United States."
Well, the Military Affairs Committee is working closely with state government leaders like Senator Ted Cruz, John Cornyn, and Congressman Jody Arrington, as well as the Air Force Secretary Heather Wilson, to prove Dyess Air Force Base is ready to be the first home for the B-21 as well as a formal training grounds.
Well, recent developments in Venezuela have caused quite a stir among the international community. First and foremost, some of the countries who support the opposition leader, Juan Guaido, are asking, what is Russia doing there?
Well, indeed, 2 Russian military planes did land in Caracas, which quickly ignited a media firestorm. Now, reports coming in say the personnel and military equipment were brought to help open a training center for Venezuelan military helicopter pilots.
When asked about this, the Russian State Cooperation for Arms Sales made this statement: Russian organizations remain committed to deepening cooperation with the Ministry of Defense and the other government agencies of Venezuela.
The United States has demanded that Russia leave Venezuela immediately. Now, Special Envoy to Venezuela, Elliot Abrams, told reporters at the State Department, "We have options, and it would be a mistake for the Russians to think they have a free hand here. They don't." However, U.S. officials like Elliot are not the only ones that seem concerned about Russia's involvement.
The UK's Foreign Secretary Jeremy Hunt tweeted, "Disappointed to learn that Maduro regime imposing further unjust measures against Juan Guaido. What Venezuela needs is not Russian military deployments, but a return to democracy through free and fair presidential elections."
Russia issued a written warning to Colombia that read, quote, "Illegitimate use of military force against Venezuela by other states that support the opposition will be interpreted as an act of aggression against a sovereign state."
Colombia's Foreign Affairs Minister responded with, Colombia reiterates that the transition to democracy must be conducted by the Venezuelans themselves peacefully and within the framework of the Constitution and international law, supported by political and diplomatic means without the use of force.
Well, due to Russia's motives being questioned, Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov explained they are simply following up on an agreement with Venezuela from 2001. Lavrov rejected the allegations that the goal is to create another Syria in Venezuela.
Well, in a trip to the Middle East, Venezuela's Foreign Minister Jorge Areza recently met with officials in Lebanon where he addressed concerns about the influence from other countries. He also put down rumors that Russia is the one meddling in Venezuelan affairs when he told reporters, there is no interference from Russia. We have had technical military cooperation with Russia for 17 years. It's just developing as it should.
Well, Mr. Areza ended by pointing the finger at the United States, saying the only interference we've had for 20 years, every day of every week of every month of every year, is from the United States.
Sounds like he's saying that the United States should be the concern and not Russia. Right. The Venezuelan foreign minister said he would be traveling to Syria next and plans to publicly pledge his support for President Bashar al-Assad, who he believes has also been targeted by the U.S. At the same time, back at home, the Venezuelan's National Constituent Assembly has made the decision to revoke opposition leader Juan Guaido's immunity. This opens the way for his prosecution by the Venezuelan government and could lead to his arrest.
Well, Guaido has acknowledged the real possibility of his arrest by the Maduro government following the removal of his immunity by the Assembly. Well, he also explained that he has been contacted by dozens of foreign ministers and presidents who support him and are concerned about the turn of events. So things are truly heating up in the region, and one has to wonder whether the U.S. and its allies will continue to pressure Russia to break its ties with Venezuela or turn its threats into actions which could have disastrous results globally.
Well, that meeting that the Venezuelan foreign minister was going to be having there in Lebanon is taking place, of course, or has taken place, and our field correspondent Larry McGee has some information on that as well as some other things. You know, it's interesting that this foreign minister here in Venezuela kind of sees the same pattern taking place that he saw taking place with Syria, right. And he kind of doesn't want the same thing to take place. So it's interesting to see how that meeting turned out. Larry, what do you have for us?
Where war is concerned, common enemies make for friends. Developing out of this fact is a newfound relationship between Venezuela, who is currently under siege by the West, and Syria, who has been fending off a U.S.-led coup attempt for years. The foreign minister for Venezuela arrived in Damascus recently to have a face-to-face sit-down with embattled Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. The Syrian leader pointed out in the meeting that Caracas is being targeted because it takes stances which are not in line with American interests. The foreign minister offered in support of that assertion his belief that the U.S. is attempting to gain control of Venezuela's resources and determine its future. In commenting on the meeting afterwards, Foreign Minister Areza stated that the two nations have the same enemy with the same interests. He also said that he communicated to President Assad that Syria's experiences will benefit Venezuela and how to confront such a conspiracy. The comments came at a joint press conference where Mr. Areza's Syrian counterpart, Syrian Foreign Minister Waid Mualim, was also present. Mr. Mualim chose to focus on Israel for his part, however, calling the nation an enemy and calling it out for going too far in its recent attacks on Syria. The Syrian diplomat also vowed that Damascus would take back the Golan Heights by all means possible and criticized current President Donald Trump for attempting to bestow control over the area to Israel, a move which he says has only served to worsen the international isolation of the United States. Meanwhile, on the international stage, the U.S. has continued to strut, recently demanding that Turkey pick a side in the Cold War that's quickly heating up. In a recent gathering, Vice President Mike Pence stated that Ankara will have to decide if it wants to remain a partner in what he believes is the most successful military alliance in the history of the world, or risk the security of that partnership by making reckless decisions that undermine that alliance. The reckless decision in question is Turkey's intention to purchase a S-400 missile system from Moscow over the objections of the United States. Turkey says, however, that the deal to purchase the Russian missile system was brought about by America's disinclination to sell Turkey its Patriot missile system, and though it is offering that deal now, the deal with Moscow has already been signed and sealed, and so it's too late. The current administration seems to be unimpressed by pesky little old-fashioned values like keeping your word, however, and so as a consequence, since Ankara remains unwilling to renege, the U.S. has begun breaking arms deals with Turkey itself to show the old nation how it's done. The U.S. contends that Turkey's use of Russian weapons could translate into Russia gaining backdoor access to critical information. For YPN News, I'm Larry McGee. Katan Jeff, back to you.
Katan, it seems like Turkey is going to be forced to make a decision there, either go with the U.S. and the fighter jets that they're receiving, or go with the missile defense system that Russia has provided with them. And of course, the Trump administration and Mr. Pence there saying that Turkey is going to have to choose. So kind of puts Turkey in a little bit of a rough spot.
Yeah, and it puts the pressure on them to make a decision.
Well, Russia recently hosted a summit with his counterparts from the Arab League. Now on the list, the U.S. President Trump's administration's agenda of the Golan Heights. Now Lavrov stated that the mutual rejection of the Israeli occupation of the Golan Heights, how it violates all UN resolutions and the UN Charter itself, and is going to increase tensions in the region.
That's right. Russia's view on the matter is getting Palestinians' attention so much that Mahmoud Abbas said that he, when speaking to the Sputnik newspaper, said that he would be willing to meet with Netanyahu to talk, but only if the invitation came from Moscow. Now, these moves are what some say Russia sees itself as a power broker in the Middle East. Now that, along with increasing its sway in other areas like Ukraine and Syria, where the U.S. is also challenging that sway from Russia, because the U.S. has been there to butt heads with Russia on each of those topics, Russia and Ukraine, Russia and Syria as well.
Well, with all these political moves by Moscow, it hasn't forgotten the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and these moves may be pivoting Russia back in that direction. And that will be interesting because, as you mentioned, Russia really hasn't been involved in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And now with all the other ones they're already dealing with the United States, and now they were going to get involved here too. Right. It's just one more avenue that Russia and the U.S. can disagree on.
That's right. Well, why don't you take a look at this next video that we're brought to you back in 2017 and in numerous occasions here in YPN, where RT, Sophie and Co. Interviewed former U.S. Secretary of Defense William Perry regarding the threat of nuclear war.
One of the world's biggest nuclear arsenals is now in the hands of Donald Trump, as the new commander-in-chief is handed the codes to America's nukes. With the nuclear threat ever present, how will Washington's policy shape up in this regard? When former United States Secretary of Defense William J. Perry is with me today to discuss all of that.
As the legacy of a bipolar world order wanes, global politics is becoming increasingly uncertain. And with the world's nuclear powers embroiled in the worst standoff in decades, the prospect of nuclear war is suddenly not so outlandish. With one accident potentially leading to the unthinkable, are nuclear arms still the strongest deterrent of war, or are they the biggest menace to the security of the world?
Former United States Secretary of Defense William Perry, welcome to the show. Great to have you with us. Mr. Perry, I remember 10 years ago, 10 years ago, 10 years ago, 10 years ago, 10 years ago at the Munich Security Conference, Putin actually warned of growing global instability, wars in the Middle East, NATO expansion, and a nuclear arms race. Now, that was a decade ago. Why have things got only worse during this time?
I think both the United States and Russia have found themselves engaged in a war of words. Rhetoric that's been increasingly belligerent, and also military buildups and threats to military buildups. I think that has put us on a dangerous path.
Well, in those comments, Katan, coming from someone who is in the know,
Right.
In the military defense, and you can see from his comments that he's saying we're not getting any further away from the nuclear threat, but actually closer to what many feel is going to be a disastrous consequence.
That's right.
Well, let's also take a look at this video clip regarding Jared Kushner and the Mideast peace plan and its long-awaited details slated to soon be released.
According to Reuters, White House advisor Jared Kushner, giving a broad outline of a U.S. peace plan for the Middle East, said it will address final status issues of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, including establishing borders. In an interview broadcast on Monday on Sky News Arabia during a visit to the U.S. allied Gulf Arab states, Kushner said the long-awaited peace proposal would build on a lot of efforts in the past, including the 1990 Oslo Accords that provided a foundation for Palestinian statehood and would require concessions from both sides.
Well, it's definitely got the international community on the edge of their seats as they wait to see what all this back and forth, in the meetings that Jared Kushner has had with various leaders is going to bring about in the details of this Mideast peace plan. We already know that the United States has said, at least the Trump administration has said, that we're going to deviate from the previous workings of previous administrations because obviously those things weren't working, and so something is new that's on the table, but of course we just don't have the details yet. So we'll see what Jared Kushner is working on with his team.
Right, and remember, President Trump is calling this the deal of the century. So when they do announce it, it will, like you said, be very interesting to see the details because they have built this up quite a bit over the last few months through all their meetings and through the different reports on what it is they're going to, how they're going to solve this problem. So again, very interesting to find out those details.
Yeah, and like we just mentioned a little bit, some of the things that have maybe been leaked out or implied, no Palestinian state, other leaders pleading for them to follow the two-state solution that was, signed back in 1993. So we kind of get little bits and pieces, but of course we don't have the whole, plan laid out in front of us. We'll just have to wait for that. Well, as we continue on regarding the Middle East peace plan, the Europeans say that they'd like to keep trying until they reach a solution, while the U.S. says that it's time to move on from the mistakes of the past, and shockingly, that the plan will not include a Palestinian state. Well, in response, leaders from the European nations sent letters to the EU and UN strongly pleading for them to not give up on the two-state solution and, of course, reject any U.S. plan that does not include the Palestinian state. And so far, of course, the EU, they're on board with this request, and because they have the same mindset in regards to sticking with a two-state solution.
Well, in a statement to I-24 News, an EU spokesperson said that the EU has always believed that the only way to end the conflict is through a two-state solution negotiated between the two parties. Now, the EU has consistently striven to ensure that the Middle East peace process remains a priority on the agenda of the international community.
And lastly, Russia's foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, said that a limited nuclear war could break out if the U.S. and other countries do not bring stability on arms control. He also said, so far, instead of hearing about constructive reactions, we are hearing about renewed nuclear tests and about withdrawing rocket systems to space, and even about the possibility of a start of a limited nuclear war. He said for Russia, and I hope most countries present here at that meeting, such a prospect is unacceptable. Of course, no one wants to see nuclear war actually take place because we all know of the devastating effects that nuclear war will bring, but this seems to be the first line of defense coupled with the rhetoric of countries when something takes place that they don't like.
Right. But Mr. Sergei Lavrov's comments that this is unacceptable, it would be great if all leaders actually chose that, that same point of view regarding the use of nuclear weapons, but we know very well they don't. And as you said, as soon as there's a conflict, they start talking about all options on the table, including nuclear, like it's a go-to, part of the go-to military, strategy that they have. But, again, Mr. Lavrov's comments, this is unacceptable, is a great stance to take.
That's right. As we know, there are no winners in nuclear war, but there's no winners in war at all. So the nations, of course, are definitely heading for war. And as we've brought out to you many, many times, Yisrael Hawkins has constantly shown through the prophecies found in your Holy Scriptures why and when these wars will start. Now, you can find out more about the prophecies concerning the last days, nuclear wars, and what's in store for mankind. When you contact the House of Yahweh, which we recommend that you do, also check out the book Birth of the Nuclear Baby, The Explosion of Sin, because in that book it actually details timelines of what the prophecy shows would be leading up to nuclear war in this time period. And even before that, Yisrael Hawkins wrote a book called Mark of the Beast, volumes 1 and 2, that also details the prophecies concerning this time period and what's leading up to these final nuclear wars.
Now, you can contact the House of Yahweh by writing them at the House of Yahweh, P.O. Box 2498, Abilene, Texas, 79604. You can call them at 1-800-613-9494. Visit them on any of their websites, yahweh.com, yisraelhawkins.com, or yahwehsbranch.com. You can also visit our website by going to ypnnews.com. If you would like to email the House of Yahweh, you can do so by emailing info@yahweh.com. For any international calls, you can call the number that's on your screen. And once again, don't forget to check out the Yisrael Says program by going to yisraelsays.com and the Ask Yisrael program by going to askyisrael.com.
Now, don't go anywhere. Up next, can I say a special presentation, not so much out of the ordinary, because this recording was the first day of the Feast of Passover and Unleavened Bread, where Yisrael Hawkins greeted the audience there, so a big celebration there. So you want to stay tuned as Yisrael Hawkins is up next. Make sure you have a pencil and paper and your book of Yahweh, because there's some great information coming for you. Up next, Yisrael Hawkins. From all of us here at YPN News, I'm Katan Alexander.
And I'm Jeffrey Heimerman.
Thank you for watching.